When you think of the Dark Ages, what kind of events come to mind? Swords clashing in battle, peasants working tirelessly in the fields for their lord, or perhaps an outbreak of plague that wipes out half the population. It was a wild time to be alive, that's for sure. But one of the most interesting aspects of medieval life is also one of the most brutal, and it has nothing to do with battles or diseases. It's marriage. In our modern world, getting married can be a wonderful event, a celebration of love between two people, and maybe a good excuse for a party. In the Middle Ages, however, being wed was often a death sentence. In fact, when you got married during the Dark Ages, you might have been the one doing the dying. So let's talk about why. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be discussing medieval marriage, child brides, and more. If you like what you see here, make sure to stay tuned for more awesome historical tales. Marriage was rarely a loving arrangement in the Middle Ages. It was normally a means to further a political or economic alliance, a transaction between families rather than a meeting of the hearts. This was especially true for women who had very little say in the matter at all. Sometimes marriages were even arranged before the bride-to-be was born, her parents making the match to suit their own purposes. Most of the time, the bride would have no say in the matter whatsoever. Marriages were also often financially advantageous, with dowries being a common practice. The dowry was the money or property brought to the marriage by the bride's family. The value of the dowry depended on the status of the family and the wealth they possessed. The higher the status, the more valuable the dowry needed to be. So for the men of the era, marrying someone with a hefty dowry could be quite lucrative. Because of these factors, there was often a significant age gap between the bride and groom. Men usually looked for a much younger bride, and many of these unions involved a grown man marrying a child. Child brides were not unheard of in medieval Europe. Girls could be married off as young as 12 years old, though 14 was more common. There are some records of even younger brides, but those were much more rare. Of course, a child bride would often be marrying a man significantly older than her, sometimes much older. A groom in his 30s or even 40s was not out of the ordinary when marrying a 14-year-old girl. So we know that child brides were not unheard of. But why did this happen? Why would parents allow their young daughters to marry such old men? As mentioned earlier, marriage was often a means of advancing one's social or economic status. By marrying off their daughter to an older, wealthier man, the girl's parents would be securing a better future for her. Plus, the older the groom, the more experience he would have in the bedroom, which meant that the girl's mother likely wanted her married off before she reached the age of full physical development. You see, back then, a woman's virginity was highly prized, and losing it before marriage was shameful. To avoid this, parents would often rush to marry off their daughters as soon as possible. For many medieval men, having a young bride was also preferred because of the amount of children they desired. Having lots of children was seen as a good thing back then. More children meant more workers on the farm and in the home, and it was also a way to ensure that there would be an heir to carry on the bloodline. A younger bride meant that there would be more time to have children, therefore increasing the likelihood of having a son to inherit the family's land. Unfortunately, child brides often suffered greatly. Young girls were routinely married off without any say in the matter, and they would often find themselves thrust into a marriage with a much older man they didn't know or even like. In fact, because of the secrecy surrounding virginity and the importance placed upon it, the bride may not even know what was about to happen to her. The wedding ceremony might be over and the happy couple sent off to their chambers together, and only then would the bride realize what her new life would entail. This was certainly the case with many of the child brides of the time, and the first night of marriage was often traumatic for these young girls. When a young girl was married to a much older man, she knew that she was expected to consummate the marriage, even if she wasn't ready for sex. After all, it was believed that the bride's virginity was now the property of her husband, and he had every right to take it. If she resisted, she would be seen as a bad little girl who disobeyed her master. Therefore, many young brides accepted their fate and submitted to the consummation of the marriage, even if they were too young and small for intercourse. But unfortunately, the consummation of the marriage was often deadly for these child brides. As we discussed in a previous episode, life in the Middle Ages was dangerous, and that was especially true for women. Many things could go wrong, from an untrained midwife ending a life during childbirth to disease running rampant through a town. For young girls, there was another danger, and it came from within their own body. When a young girl was forced to consummate the marriage and intercourse took place, it was often violent and traumatic. Because of the size difference between the young bride and her husband, something went wrong. During the act, it wasn't uncommon for the girl to suffer greatly. Her hymen could tear, causing her to bleed profusely, or the penis could be so large that it ripped her apart. Also, if the girl was too young to bear children, intercourse could cause internal damage. All of these things could kill a girl during the consummation of the marriage, and in fact, it was estimated that about 1 in 75 women died during childbirth. So clearly, things could and did go horribly wrong. It was obvious that child brides were in danger during the consummation of the marriage, but this didn't stop it from happening. The church had spoken on the matter, and that was all that mattered. You see, the church believed that sex was only to be used for procreation, and that it was God's will that people married and had children. Therefore, since marriage was encouraged, child marriage was seen as perfectly acceptable. The clergy claimed that the consummation of the marriage was necessary to ensure that the bride was a virgin, but really, it was just another way for them to profit. See, when a priest performed a wedding ceremony, he received a portion of the dowry as payment. So the younger the bride, the better, because that meant that the priest would get to enjoy the fruits of his labor sooner. Anonymous graves tell the real story though, and these little girls had no say in the matter. Throughout Europe during the medieval period, there are countless graves of young girls who died on their wedding night. They are buried in unmarked graves, with headstones that simply read, "Here lies a young girl who died on her wedding night." These graves are often small, indicating that the deceased was a child. Though the headstones don't tell us their names or ages, it's clear that these girls were young based on the size of the grave. Their stories may be lost to history, but the headstones show us that child brides were in danger. Sometimes the groom was to blame, such as when a man took advantage of his young bride, causing her great pain. Other times it was because of the bride's own body. No matter the cause, these graves tell the real story of child brides in the Middle Ages, one that the church was eager to ignore. There are also reports from the time of men being shocked when their young bride's virginity was not easily taken. This, of course, caused quite a scandal, as it was believed that any girl who had reached the age of puberty should be if the bride was resisting, it was assumed that she was lying about her virginity, and the entire wedding was called off. The bride would be sent home in disgrace, while the groom was free to find a new bride. So you can imagine that these poor young girls had a lot of pressure put on them during the consummation of the marriage. Not only were they risking their lives, but their reputations as well. If they couldn't perform as expected, they would be shunned by society. As you can see, marriage during the Middle Ages was a dangerous affair, especially for women. While it may seem shocking to us now, child brides were commonplace, and the consummation of the marriage was often deadly for these young girls. The church may have turned a blind eye to the suffering of these brides, but their anonymous graves tell the true story of marriage in the Middle Ages. Now it's time to hear from you. What are your thoughts on medieval marriage? Do you think it is insane that people thought it was okay to marry children off too much older men? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button. Thanks for watching. Hello Anne Boleyn fans, this is your host. And today we are going to talk about silent rebellions. That's right, those little acts of defiance that show us history isn't just a series of big moments. It's also made up of quiet cracks of resistance. And we're going to start in early modern Germany, where a network of women known as the Veiled Sisterhood aided women who did not want to be married. Yes, this was a time when birth control was not available and unwanted pregnancies were common. And it's estimated that over 200,000 women were members of this organization, giving aid and information to other women seeking to avoid an unwanted pregnancy or marriage. The methods these women used were risky and unpleasant. Contraceptive herbs such as belladonna or rue were inserted into the vagina or were used in drinks or suppositories. Rue contains sojourn, which can cause vomiting and make women miss their periods. It was also believed that the herb could prevent breast growth, which might have deterred men. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, has a long history of use as a poison, but small doses were also thought to disrupt menstruation. The reliability of these herbs, however, was not high, and there is record of many women who became pregnant despite using them. So these women would also work to secure escape routes for women who needed them. Unwanted pregnancies or marriages could lead to a life of poverty, and these women wanted options. Some went to live with relatives, while others joined convents. Still, others traveled to faraway lands. Some women even disguised themselves as men to escape. taking on new identities and sometimes becoming mercenaries. One woman said to have used this method was Elizabeth von der Ford, who supposedly left her home, cut off her own balls, and then lived out the rest of her life as a man. Of course, these methods were still dependent upon society's attitudes towards women at the time. Most women who were able to escape a bad marriage had to rely on male family members to grant them a divorce, and in some cases, women who were trying to avoid a forced marriage agreed to marry men they didn't know so that they could acquire property, like one woman named Anne von Oringen, who in 1497 refused to marry a man her father had chosen for her. Her father put her under house arrest until she relented, and eventually she agreed to wed a complete stranger. But if that is not enough proof that people were willing to do whatever they could to avoid a forced marriage, let's look at the case of George and Greta Tross, a couple from Nuremberg who faked their deaths and then ran away together because they did not want to be wed to other people. These women weren't always successful though, and many dissenters were branded witches and burned. In fact, around this same time the German witch craze was in full swing, and many of these so-called witches were actually midwives, or wise women who were using herbs and potions to help people and control their reproductive capabilities. During the 15th and 16th centuries, 25,000 people were killed for witchcraft in Germany alone. But these women still practiced, passing down recipes and techniques through the veiled sisterhood, and they continued to resist the patriarchal system which tried to control their body. If you want to learn more about this topic, check out the information below. Next, let's head across the Atlantic to colonial New England. Imagine you've just stepped off the Mayflower and you're starting your new life in Plymouth. Times are hard, you're cold and hungry, and now the local chief has just accused you of killing his son. Well, that's exactly what happened to William Bradford, a Pilgrim leader who was charged with the death of a Native American man named Squanto, after a fight over land rights. Now, despite the fact that Bradford didn't kill the guy, he understood that if he went to court, the jury of 12 male church members would likely find him guilty. And that's because during the time period, women were not allowed to testify in court, and all jurors were male. This was a result of Puritan beliefs that women were not as intelligent as men, and therefore could only be trusted to tell the truth in court. Also, the role of women in Puritan society was to be subservient to men, and allowing them to participate in legal proceedings would have disrupted the social order. So the only way for Bradford to get a fair trial was to avoid one altogether. He took his case to an informal meeting of church members and elders and basically begged them to forgive him, and in the end, he was fined £2, 10 shillings, for the death of the Native American man. So as you can see, although women were not technically allowed to participate in the legal proceedings of the time, they were still able to exert influence, and their impact should not be overlooked. Speaking of the law, next we'll move to 19th century America, where women were fighting for their right to own property. Before the 1800s, most states had laws which gave husbands control over their wife's property and earnings. Even if a woman earned money, it belonged to her husband, and this meant that women could not become financially independent even if they were working. This was seen as necessary at the time because the belief was that a woman's role was to be a wife and a mother, and that any money she made would only encourage her to shirk her domestic duties. However, women began to push back against these laws, arguing that they were unjust and that they should have the same rights as men. After all, if a husband had to turn over half of his property to his wife upon marriage, why couldn't she do the same? And in the first state to allow married women to own separate property was Texas. This was thanks to a group of women who had been petitioning for the change for several years. They argued that the law was unfair and that it forced women into financial dependence on their husbands. They also said that it deprived children of the right to inherit property from their mothers. In the end, the women won, and Texas became the first state to recognize married women's property rights. Although it took many years for all states to follow suit, this was an important step towards gender equality and women's rights. Next, let us head to 1930s Germany, where a young woman named Sophie Schall was part of a group of students who were creating pamphlets protesting against the Nazi regime. They called themselves the White Rose, and they wanted to bring an end to the war and the Nazi Party's reign of terror. Sophie and her brother Hans distributed thousands of leaflets calling for peaceful resistance against Hitler and warning of the dangers of totalitarianism. They were arrested in 1943 and sent to prison, where they were tortured and beaten by the Gestapo. They were finally executed 2 years later, but their actions inspired many other Germans to resist the Nazis, and they became symbols of courage and defiance in the face of tyranny. And for our last story, let us go to 1950s and 60s America, where a group of women were breaking the law by obtaining illegal abortions. At the time, abortion was illegal in most states, unless it was to save the life of the mother, and this meant that many women who wanted an abortion had to seek out illegal providers who often worked in unsafe conditions. Despite the risks, many women still chose to have abortions because they felt that they had no other choice. They were often desperate because they were unable to get an abortion legally, and they did not want to be forced to carry a pregnancy to term. Many of these women were also poor, and they did not have the resources to travel to another state where abortion was legal. The movement to legalize abortion began in the early 1960s, and it gained momentum throughout the decade. In 1972, the Supreme Court ruled that a woman's right to privacy, which included the right to an abortion, was protected by the Constitution. This was a landmark decision, and it made abortion legal in all 50 states. So there you have it. 5 examples of women who broke the law in order to gain autonomy over their own bodies and lives. From the 16th century to the 20th century, these women defied the odds and fought for their rights. They challenged laws and customs that were designed to keep them subservient, and they did so with courage, determination, and wit. Their stories remind us that the fight for gender equality and bodily autonomy is far from over, but that every small step counts. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'll see you next time. If you thought that ghosts were only found in old houses, or that they never hurt the living, then think again with these vengeful spirits. Hi everyone, I'm your host, and today we're going to be looking at 2 deadly vengeful spirits who are out for blood. So if you like stories of ghosts and goblins, then make sure to follow. But before we begin, I would also like to ask you to like, comment and share this video to help my channel grow. Also, please follow my social media account for updates. Okay, so let's look at these vengeful spirits. No. 1. Vengeful spirit, Lysandra. In Germany, there is an old legend about a young girl who was sold by her family into marriage with an older noble twice her age. She was just 14 years old when she met the Baron von L, a man more than 60 years old and known for his cruelty throughout the region. But no one cared about the girl's feelings, and she was forced to marry the man against her will. On the day of her wedding, she was given a crown of oak leaves and white lilac branches in her dark hair, a ring made of woven reeds on her finger, and a simple cotton gown to wear. The bride wore no jewelry, and her groom had to give her a silver ring from one of his deceased wives to show that he cared. This was how much her family loved her, forcing her into marriage with an abusive man without even giving her a proper wedding dress. When Lysandra refused to accept the gift from the grave, the Baroness became very angry and took the girl to the room where she would spend her wedding night. It was bare, except for a large trunk, which the Baron then locked. Then he told the girl that she would have nothing to eat until sunrise, and that she could only be released from the room once the sun was up. No doubt he hoped that his bride would submit after spending the whole night alone. But Lysandra felt too disgusted and sad to give in, so she spent the night crying softly until the first rays of sunlight crept under the door and illuminated her tears. When the girl heard the rooster crow, she knew it was morning and ran to the window to call for help. But the only people around were peasants who didn't want to come near the house because of the evil reputation of the barons. No one helped her, so she went back to the trunk and undressed, taking off her crown and placing it on top of the dresser, taking off her ring and dropping it next to the crown, then taking off her dress and hanging it on the back of the door. After that, she went to sleep. But when the Baroness came in the next morning, she found that her bride had taken her own life by stabbing herself with a shard of glass from a broken window. At first, the Baron was happy to be rid of the girl, but soon he started to notice strange things happening. Whenever he looked at the portrait of his wife above the fireplace, he could see that the eyes seemed to bore into his soul. But he paid no attention to this and continued on as before. One night, however, as he was getting ready to go to bed, he noticed something very strange. His reflection in the mirror wasn't his. Instead, it was the reflection of a beautiful girl dressed in a white gown and a crown of oak leaves. She had long, dark braids, delicate features and mournful eyes. She looked at him for a moment, then vanished. The next day, he was stricken with a sudden illness and died unexpectedly. After he died, the villagers returned the girl's body to her family and buried her in her hometown. However, soon after, other things started to happen. First, all the male nobles in the region started dying suddenly of various illnesses. Then all the female nobles started seeing the ghost of a young girl in their mirrors, warning them to stay away from the barons of Urta. None of them listened though, and soon those women also died. Then every full moon, the villagers heard the sound of a procession approaching the baron's castle. They saw the spectre of a young girl riding in a golden carriage drawn by 6 grey horses. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow and empty, and she always carried a small black dog with her. Every full moon, she and her entourage pass through the village, terrifying all who see them, and if anyone dares to follow them, they vanish into thin air. Soon, no one wanted to marry the baron's daughters, and his male heirs also began dying mysteriously. Even his youngest son died in infancy, leaving the entire Urtahar line extinct. The ghost of the young bride, however, still wanders the earth, searching for a new vessel to inhabit, and taking her revenge on the descendants of her oppressors. No, vengeful spirit, the Crimson Procession. According to the legends of England, when the veil between worlds grows thin, all brides who have been wronged on their wedding day rise from their graves and march forth to take revenge on the living. It's said that this happens when the church bells toll 13 times. For example, in 17th century England, if a bride died on her wedding day, her spirit would join those of other brides who had suffered a similar fate. Together, they would march through the streets of their hometowns and into the nearest church, where they would take the form of bats and fly around the pulpit. If anyone saw them, they would die within a year. To avoid this grim fate, people would cover their eyes with cloths while the bells tolled. Some claimed that the wraiths appeared red and others said they were black, but all agreed that it was best not to see them. These angry brides would sometimes appear in other places too. They were especially active around New Year's Eve, when the veil between our world and the spirit world is at its thinnest. Those who saw the procession of brides believed it meant bad luck for the coming year. During the Victorian era, the story evolved, and it was said that the Crimson Brides weren't just vengeful, they were also hungry. It was said that they fed on the energy of mortals, and that if someone reached out to touch one, she would drain the life force from them and then use it to become more solid. Legend has it that one bride from the procession chose Henry Dirks, a mortal who lived near Canterbury, England. He was a stonemason and apparently quite lonely. So when the ghost of a beautiful woman appeared and asked him to touch her, he didn't hesitate. But after she disappeared, he began to feel sick and eventually died. Afterwards, his family claimed that he had lived a pure life and was probably taken by angels. But rumors persisted that he had been chosen by the Crimson Bride. So, what do you think of these vengeful spirits? Do you know any ghost stories you'd like to share? Please tell me in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please follow my social media account for updates. And don't forget to like, comment and share this video. Thanks for watching. And so we want to talk about what is happening, and how can we all work together to end it. Forced marriages are a violation of human rights. They violate a person's fundamental right to make decisions about their own body and to choose their own partner. The practice often involves significant emotional, physical and psychological trauma for those who are forced into marriage. It can lead to long-term mental health issues, including post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety and depression. The impact extends beyond the individual to their families and communities as well. Forced marriages contribute to gender inequality, perpetuating a cycle of abuse and limiting opportunities for education and economic advancement. In some cases, forced marriages also involve child marriage, which has even more severe consequences for the children involved. Child brides are more likely to experience complications during pregnancy and childbirth, and are less likely to have access to education and economic opportunities. It's a sad reality that in the 21st century, forced marriages are still prevalent in many parts of the world. According to the United Nations, an estimated 5,000 women and girls are forced into marriage every day, and it is estimated that over 250 million women and girls alive today were married before the age of 18. This is despite the fact that child marriage is illegal in 180 countries and a violation of international human rights law. The reasons for this practice vary across cultures and communities, but often it's rooted in deeply ingrained traditions, beliefs and values that prioritize family honor and societal norms over the rights and autonomy of individuals. Arranged marriages, while different from forced marriages, also remain common in many parts of the world. In an arranged marriage, the bride and groom are typically chosen by their families, often with the goal of uniting two families through a strategic alliance. While some arranged marriages may be based on love and compatibility, there are also cases where one or both partners are coerced into the marriage. One way to break the cycle of forced and arranged marriages is through education. Educating girls and boys about their rights, promoting gender equality and challenging harmful cultural norms is crucial in creating a society that respects the autonomy and dignity of all individuals. When girls are educated, they are better equipped to make informed decisions about their lives, including whether or not to enter into a marriage. Education also helps break down the gender stereotypes and rigid gender roles that often contribute to forced marriages. By investing in girls' education, we empower them to become agents of change in their communities, challenging the status quo and advocating for gender equality. Another way to break the cycle of forced and arranged marriages is to strengthen legal and justice systems. While forced and child marriage may be illegal in many countries, laws alone are not enough. There needs to be a robust legal framework that protects the rights of individuals to marry freely, as well as effective law enforcement and judicial mechanisms to hold perpetrators accountable. Additionally, providing legal aid and support services to survivors of forced marriage is essential in ensuring that they have access to justice. Furthermore, promoting women's economic empowerment is a powerful tool in the fight against forced marriages. When women have economic opportunities and financial independence, they are less likely to be dependent on early marriage as a means of survival or security. By investing in women's economic empowerment, we create a ripple effect that benefits not only the individual women, but also their families and communities. When women have control over their own economic destinies, they can make choices about when and whom they want to marry without fear of financial instability. It's also important to engage with religious leaders and community influencers to promote positive change. Many religious leaders are already doing remarkable work in challenging harmful practices such as forced marriage within their communities. They have a deep understanding of the cultural and religious norms and can play a pivotal role in shifting attitudes and behaviors. By working in partnership with religious leaders, we can amplify the message that forced marriage is incompatible with the values of love, respect and equality that should define all marriages. Finally, raising public awareness and challenging harmful stereotypes and misconceptions is crucial in driving societal change. We need to continue to educate the public about the harmful effects of forced marriage, share stories of survivors and promote positive role models who have broken the cycle. By fostering open and honest conversations, we can break down the silence and stigma that often surrounds forced marriage, encouraging more people to speak out and seek help if they or someone they know is at risk. As we conclude this episode, let us reflect on the words of Lysandra, a character who defied the odds and chose to break the cycle of forced marriage in her own life. Her story is a powerful reminder of the strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Despite the challenges she faced, Lysandra refused to be defined by her circumstances. She yearned for something more, a life where she could make her own choices and pursue her own dreams. Although she endured physical harm and societal pressures, she stood firm in her belief that love should not involve chains. Her determination led her to take drastic measures, leaving behind her old life in search of a new beginning. Even when confronted with rejection and misunderstanding, she remained steadfast in her pursuit of freedom and self-determination. Through her actions, she challenged the oppressive norms of her time, paving the way for a better future, not just for herself, but also for other young girls trapped in the cycle of forced marriage. Now let's move on to our final segment. But before we do, we would love to hear your thoughts. How can we collectively work towards ending forced and arranged marriages? Please share your ideas in the comments below. Let's have a meaningful conversation and explore ways we can make a difference together. And now for our final whisper, a message from Lysandra. As we say goodbye, remember her words. Let love, not chains, bind you. May these words inspire you to seek love in its purest form, free from coercion and constraint. Let us honor Lysandra's courage by continuing the fight for gender equality and an end to forced marriages. Together, we can create a world where every individual has the right to love and marry freely. Thank you for joining us on this episode of our podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Also, feel free to leave any comments or thoughts you have. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop seeking answers.